If you haven't figured it out, I'm the Chris part of Chris and Jennifer, and we're happy to be able to spend a few minutes with you folks talking about our journey in recovery, and we have a little format we're gonna take on to do that. So I want to kick that off though by just a quick story. I used to run a lot. You can't ever tell that now, but I used to run a lot, and we lived up north, and one of my running paths took me across an overpass, across the freeway, and it was just a two-lane overpass, and I remember the morning I went out running, and I just stopped on the overpass and watched the traffic coming towards me. And I watched the big trucks coming, and I thought, I could just do this. I could just time my jump the right way and just meet one of those trucks head on. And that's when I first felt strongly about quitting. But that's not where our journey starts. That's not where our story starts. So I want to go back a little bit in time. I was born in Alaska. That's how far back I'm taking you. And I was raised in the desert in southern Nevada, right across the border from Death Valley. So those are two really sharp contrasts, and those contrasts kind of followed me through my life as we go through this. But my mom had left my biological dad, who I never knew. He was an alcoholic and abusive, and we ended up in Las Vegas, and she met my adopted dad, and we moved out to the middle of the desert where he was living. He worked on the Nevada test site. It was a very isolated, spread out valley. We had a little elementary school out there, but to go to junior high and high school, we went to an entirely different town that was 40 miles away. And my adopted dad was a pack rat, and in the back of our property, he had a big shed. And in this shed, there was just treasure troves of stuff for little curious kids. And my brother, who was older than I and myself, we would go out there and poke around in his stuff and drive him crazy. But we found a box of old pornography, really old pornography. And that's when I was 5, was my first exposure to pornography. Across the highway from where we lived was a landfill. We called it a dump, but my brother and I, as we roamed around the desert, we would find pornography out there. And as we got older, my brother had other resources and started finding more pornography, and he would hide it in his room, and I would go get it from his room. And so pornography was with me since that whole time, and I didn't realize it at the time that pornography was becoming such a friend for me. Living out in the desert in isolation, it's very lonely. The wind was always blowing. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter and dusty, and no one was around. My mom worked, my dad worked. He worked graveyards on the test site, so he was never home. So I grew up kind of the latchkey kid, and pornography became my companion. And then when it came time to go to junior high and high school, I was always interested in sports, and I had tons of hobbies, but I was a fairly bright kid, so I became a high achiever in school, valedictorian, all-state stuff in sports, state champion in track, and just different things. And, kind of the quote-unquote, we joke about it, the golden boy story, if you will. But there's really only, that was what people saw, but that's really only half of the story that was going on. I'm going to go into that later, but I want Jennifer to tell you her start.
I grew up in Bountiful, not very far from here. I grew up the oldest of 6 children. I grew up with great parents, great people around us, and I got messages that I was, pretty perfect. And I was taking care of my siblings, and I was in charge of them, and I was given lots of responsibility from a young age, and I just kind of grew up learning that there were people who needed help and people who were helpers. And I was a helper. And so that's just kind of what I did. As I went through school, I really didn't do anything bad. I didn't drink Coke, and I didn't swear. And I just kind of went through on the right path and, thought that everything was gonna work out because that's what I was doing. So,
so you can tell we came from a little slightly different worlds there, and Jennifer was the oldest in her family. I was the youngest in mine, so as they say, that's the perfect matchup because she's used to raising kids. We'll get into that part of the story here in just a minute. So after my exposure to pornography, and I talked about the continued exposure, I believed the whole time that that was a bad thing when I got old enough. I had a conscience. My family wasn't religious in any way. But I just didn't feel this was a good thing. And knowing that it was bad because it was hidden, I just continued to hide it. My father was very, very strong into corporal punishment. And so when we got in trouble, we got in trouble. He when I was quite young, about the time of my exposure, actually, he had a piece of black rubber hose and he split it in three halfway up, and that's what he would use on us when we got in trouble. And I'm not trying to throw my dad under the bus. My dad was raised in the foster system in the 20s. His mother died when he was 13, and he went through a lot of really hard stuff, and I love him, and I'm certainly reconciled to him through that. But what I learned there, though, was being honest about things didn't pay off for me. It was very painful, and it was shaming, and it was hard to go through. And I didn't realize at the time what was happening to me was I had my struggles with pornography and my self-doubt and my issues with that being wrong, that I didn't have any place to take. There was no network, there was no group, there was no anything. And as just a young kid that grew up with that, I just learned that was a piece of me that just had to stay hidden. Because it was too painful to bring it out into the light, and there was no place to take it if I wanted to. And so I had the public piece of me, which was the high achieving, doing all those great, like we said earlier, the golden boy pieces. But inside, to me, that was all just fake, because my definition of me was I didn't know I was an addict, but was the addict. Eventually went to college. Jennifer and I met at what I lovingly refer to as Lourdes University at Utah State. We got married, and that created a big issue for me as an addict, because I used to be able to maintain my private existence more easily because I wasn't attached to anyone. There was no intimate connection. And now I was married, and I couldn't hide those things as well. So I started manifesting that piece in emotional abuse, denial, blaming, anger, just being a really nasty person towards Jennifer. Because I didn't know how to deal with it. I was broken emotionally, and I was too close to her and too close to the reality of it with no place, I couldn't just hide it anymore. But I still kept it a secret from her. So we graduated, had a baby, moved out of state, went to graduate school. I got a job that required a lot of business travel, and this was right about the time that the internet proliferated. And that opened up a whole new world to my addict. There was a span of, between the time I went to college initially and the time I started traveling on business, I wasn't exposed to pornography at all in a hard form. There was plenty of soft porn around, whether that was on MTV or those types of media, but I had a lot of fantasy that I would act out with and the like. Eventually, Jennifer and I moved back to Utah, and we had our fourth baby after we moved back here. And all during that time, I was still acting out. I was still faking this existence, thinking that I was actually doing a good job of hiding when I wasn't at all. And I went on a trip in 1998. Went on a business trip, acted out while I was out, and came back. And when I got home, Jennifer said something nice to me. I don't even remember what it was. It was just very pleasant. And I just told her. I just said, I have a problem with pornography. And let me pause there.
Okay, I guess my mic isn't working. Oh, okay. Okay, so Chris and I met in church. I was sitting on the side pew with my roommate, and he came in and asked if he could sit down. And he sat by me, and our shoulders touched. And we just sat there with our shoulders touching, and we did not move the whole meeting. We were engaged 3 weeks later. So we didn't really have a lot of time. Right after that, I went to BYU Hawaii, and so we're apart. Most of our courtship was through letters. Chris would write me letters every day, single-spaced, many pages, front and back. I had hit the jackpot, and I was super in love with him. And I came back, and we got married, and we went up to Utah State, and I started seeing some things that I hadn't seen before. We hadn't really been together before. I started seeing what I was modeled in my parents when they got mad. They just didn't talk. There was just silence. There was no throwing things. There was no yelling. There was nothing like that. There was just silence. And so when I didn't like what was happening, I was just quiet. Well, Chris was not quiet. Chris would yell and throw things and hit the wall. And so I didn't really, I had a hard time processing that. But however, I knew that I was the fixer, right? I'm the helper. I'm the person who helps. And so if there was something wrong, then certainly I could figure it out and make it right. And so I just continued trying to do that in our life as we graduated and when we moved to Oregon. And I just kept trying to do things better. I just tried to look cuter and keep the kids quiet and keep the house clean and make good dinners and make his favorite desserts and have more sex and just whatever I could do, because obviously I was the problem. And, when I would ask, what's the problem, it would be me. And so I just continued to do my thing, which had always worked before, which was, just be better myself and try and fix it.
And I should have mentioned a couple things. I'm good now, thank you. We're trying to leave time at the end of this for questions, and we'd encourage you to ask anything you want to ask. We don't have any boundary issues as far as our journey. So if there's anything you have that you want to bring up, please do. If it could be helpful to you in any way, we would love to do whatever we can there. And we actually dated for 3.5 weeks before we got engaged, just so we're clear on that. And then I tried to move, but she wouldn't let me. All right, I made that part up. So, 1998, I tell her. We went and I saw a counselor a couple times, got a prescription for antidepressants, and which actually helped a little bit with my personality, but that lasted a few months on my own, working through it. But then I started acting out again. Eventually got Jennifer found pornography at home again. That's the addict way of saying that I acted out and it was her fault for finding it. My bad attempt at humor there. So I acted out at home. She found pornography on the home computer. And I had read, I think just prior or after that, there was an article in the Deseret News about pornography. And it made a reference to a book. And the book was called Pornography, the Drug of the New Millennium. And I just made reference to that as Jennifer and I were talking. And Jennifer actually went and got the book. And in that book, there was a reference in the back to what at the time was known as STAR, which is today known as LifeStar, which is a recovery system here in the Valley. And so we started LifeStar. Jennifer called them. Jennifer went happily. I went kicking and screaming because I was sure I didn't have a problem I couldn't conquer myself. And LifeStar, the way they work, it's a 3-phase type of program. And can you hear me? We back now? Is that better? Okay. So we went to phase 1 together, and that eventually ended up being a really good thing after I got done whining and fussing about going. And then phase 2 was a part of where we split up into different groups. Men would go on one night, women on the other, and then phase 3. I enjoyed phase 1. Phase 2 was not a good experience. I'd started acting out again during phase 2. The group was toxic. And I wasn't doing the work, okay? And then during phase 3, when I went into that, that started off better, but I was still acting out. And I remember part of that, I remember being in Chicago and acting out and calling Jennifer and telling her about that when I was driving, and then going and telling my group about it and whatnot. But I wasn't, that was one out of many that I was still hiding. I was still hiding all of this, trying to go through the motions of a recovery group, but hiding all the while. And finally in 2004, I had acted out again at home, and Jennifer again found pornography on the home computer. And that was the catalyst for real effort. And I'm gonna let Jennifer talk to that point because it's important we go forward from there.
So in 1998, when Chris came home from that trip and told me I have a problem with pornography, I was relieved. I thought, great. I said to him, so it's not me? No. So it's not the kids? No. So it's not work? So it's not everything that you've been blaming for years? It's pornography. Yeah. Okay, let's put that in a box and let's put that on the table and let's point at it and say, yuck, what are we going to do about that? And we talked about it. We went to counseling a couple of times. I didn't know much about it, but I thought, okay, done. We took care of that. It's over with. And he came back personally to the Chris that I fell in love with, and but as time went on, as he said, a couple months later, the anger started coming back, and the resentment and the victim kind of mentality started coming back, and we started thinking, okay, this is a bigger deal. When I got that book, I read the book. I read it cover to cover. I asked Chris to read the book. It was really a hard read. I would recommend that you read it, but it's tough. And so Chris would not want to read it anymore, and he would stop, because it's just too close to home. But we got through that. We went to LifeStar. I was thrilled to find people that were like us, and thrilled to have somebody who understood what was happening. And phase 1 was good because we talked a lot and we figured some stuff out. Phase 2, we split up, and I loved it. I went on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, and that's where my people were, and that's where I just baby stepped to Wednesday night at 7 o'clock where I could have somewhere to talk. And went through phase 3, really started learning a lot about being codependent. I read Codependent No More. I would recommend that. Beyond Codependency, anything Melanie Beattie. I got The Language of Letting Go, and I used to just read a couple of paragraphs every day because it was just hard to read anything. It was just hard to get your mind going on anything. I prayed. And I just worked. I just did the work. Whatever they said to do. One assignment was name 20 things that you want. That was the hardest assignment that I had. I could not name 20 things that I wanted. I could name 50 things that Chris wanted. I could name a ton of the things that the kids wanted, but what I wanted, I had lost myself. I had no idea. But I did that work. And by the time 2004 came around and I found pornography on the computer, I was okay. I had done the work, and I had figured out who I was, and I had figured out that I am not perfect, and there's only one Savior, and it's not me, and I'm not in charge of anybody but myself. And those were some big revelations to me, but they were also very freeing because that was nice to know. I wasn't in charge of him. And so I started thinking about what am I going to do about me and how am I going to take care of me? Because I can't depend on anybody else to take care of me or to control my feelings or anything about myself except for me. And so I just started doing that work. And so by the time I found pornography on the computer, I was ready to say, hey, it's that or it's us. You choose. But it doesn't work all together in the same space. So which life do you want? I'll be okay either way.
We like to tell the story together because my recovery and Jennifer's life, it's a dovetail. And when Jennifer we get asked this question a lot, like, Jennifer, what's the thing you did that helped Chris the most? You know, it's like that people want to, what's the quick fix? What's the light switch thing? And for me, Jennifer just took care of herself. She stopped buying the lies. She told me, frankly, she told me, you have no words. Your words mean nothing to me. I can't believe them. I can't trust them. So I'm just watching. I'm watching your actions. And that will tell me where you're at. I don't need to hear anything from you. And I hated that because I no longer had the ability to manipulate her, to emotionally abuse her, to lie to her, to deny, to blame, to do those things that was feeding my addict and keeping me from facing the reality of what I had become by my choices. I was in my phase 3 group still, and one of the members of the group started talking about honesty and his view of what that impact was for him as an addict in recovery. And I stopped that day and started thinking about what I was doing, honestly. And I recognized all the different ways that I lie, that I hide, that I run. We used to live in Oregon, and in Oregon, there's a lot of mushroom farms. And if you know anything about mushrooms, you know, they're a fungus. They usually generate from something that's rotting. And mushroom farms are these buildings that are dark, they're full of manure, for lack of a better term, and mushrooms grow in the crap, in the dark. And I started viewing all my lies like that. My lies come from crap. My lies come from darkness. And similarly, when a fungus is exposed to light, a mushroom's exposed to intense light, the light of truth, if you will, for my lies, they will wither and die. They'll shrivel, they'll go away. So I started trying to practice being honest. But I knew, too, that I couldn't do that in a silo or just rely on Jennifer that, because I had a words issue, right? So practicing honesty, I knew had to be behavioral for me. But I needed more help. And that was an honest recognition for me, too. As I looked at being honest about my recovery, I knew I had to stop trying to do this alone. Even though I was in group, even though I was doing those types of things, I was still trying to do things alone in isolation. And it wasn't working. And I had to be honest about that. So I reached out to some friends. The first people I told, I was on the way back from the airport one night, and I stopped in at Jennifer's parents, and I sat down and told them the whole story. And then I went to a couple good friends and told them the story. I went to my boss. Jennifer and I talked to some friends about it. Jennifer agreed to do that with me. And started expanding that. And the feedback was really interesting. I was expecting what I would say would be a tepid reaction to what I was telling them, or disappointment, or all of that. And to a person, that never happened to me. My honesty was met with usually raised eyebrows, and the response would be like, okay, this is explaining so much to us, because we've always thought you were a really great person that we could never get close to. We could never get, there's always a barrier. It always seems like you had a barrier around you. And indeed I did. I was not capable of connecting on an honest level with anyone, because I was living in my addict and buying into the lie of the addict, that I wasn't worthy of those people. I wasn't worthy or capable of handling that type of a relationship with intimacy and openness and honesty. And it was a lie I fell for hook, line, and sinker. And one, if you think back to the story I've told about growing up, I learned to hide from the potential pain of any of that. And that became a huge crutch for me throughout my entire life. The idea that I'm bad and I'm just going to hide from that and no one's going to know. But everyone knew. That was the feedback. Everyone sensed it. Everyone knew there was something there that was keeping them from being able to connect with me. I did eventually graduate from Lifestar, and one of the things that happened right away with that was Lifestar asked me to serve as a peer facilitator. So until COVID hit, I would go every week and meet with a phase 2 group and they call me the no BS guy, because you can't lie to a liar. We always know. So we've talked a lot about that piece of the journey, and I want to talk about some specifics. As I started being honest, some of the techniques, some of the things we did that helped along the recovery road for me. Technology was a massive issue for me. It was kind of like Smith told us in the opening remarks, we grew up without it and now we live in it, and we don't know what that is. And we're raising our kids and we don't know how to deal with it. But because technology was an issue, I realized the home computer was a problem for me. So Jennifer was working. So before she went to work, I would take the keyboard and the mouse and the power cord and put those in a bag and put them in her car. And then she would drive to work with that. Sometimes she knew, sometimes she didn't. That was not my concern. My concern was, how do I protect myself and the family from that when I'm home alone? Because I was working at home at the time. I also asked Jennifer to manage all my passwords. and she agreed to do that. And I'm grateful to her for agreeing to that and being that resource for me. I've had a smartphone that's dumb for years and years. I don't have the internet on my phone. I don't have passwords to my phone. There are no workarounds. I don't try to find workarounds because there's no payoff for me there. Today, if I'm using my laptop at home, I only use that if Jennifer's with me. She's laying right beside me. We usually do that when we're just laying there at the end of the day. But we have TV content restrictions. We have all those types of things. So those are all tactics. Those are all really important tactics for me in my recovery. But it all files back to, what am I being honest about? And more importantly, what am I lying about? Because the lies, that's what starts it. And a lie is easy. What's a little lie? But little lies can become big lies, and you become comfortable lying again, being dishonest about anything. Because what that does is creates and generates a flawed core belief that causes problems. If I had jumped from the overpass, I would have quit. And there's a big difference between surrender and quit. And Smith mentioned fighting. And it's important to fight. We fight every day, this thing. But surrender is a huge part of that battle. We have to surrender the parts we can't control to a higher power. For me, that's God. We have to learn to surrender those things, and then we're better equipped to fight the fight. I was just watched a little blurb from a YouTube, and it just interestingly just showed up on my computer the other day. And it was a snippet of the film A Beautiful Mind, if you remember that, about the mathematician John Nash. Lovely recovery movie, by the way. But in it, he's just been told that he's been nominated for the Nobel Prize, and the person takes him into the big faculty fancy lounge place at Princeton, and a place where he has never gone because he's concerned about who he is and what he might do in there, and never felt welcome. And as he's sitting there with him, the gentleman from the Nobel, he says, we're a little concerned, basically, is what he's telling him. And Nash says, well, you're concerned that I'm going to get up on the podium and jump around and squawk like a chicken. And the guy is like, yeah, that's kind of what we're worried about. And he says, well, the truth is, I might. And he said, I am crazy. I still see things that are not real, that are not here. I just choose not to acknowledge them. And he finished with, he said, like a diet of the mind, I choose not to indulge certain appetites. And for me, recovery starts with honesty, and honesty is a choice. It's a choice we're blessed to be able to make every day. I choose honesty because God tells me I should be honest. He doesn't say, if you're honest, Jennifer will be nicer to you. Or if you're honest, people around you will like you more. He just says, you're my son. That's the right thing to do. You don't buy flowers for your wife because it might make her happy. You do it because God says, look at this beautiful daughter of God. Recognize that. That's a good thing to do. Be in recovery because that's the right thing to do. Be honest because it's the right thing to do. Not because someone may treat you better. We have to surrender that temptation and connect for the purpose of connecting with a higher power. There's only one good reason to do anything in the world, and that's because your higher power, for me, my God, says that's what you should do. So I choose honesty, and I choose recovery. And this is a journey. I harbor no illusion that between now and the time I leave the earth, I'm going to arrive at a plateau and plant my flag, and it says, I'm recovered. I will never take that for granted again. And I'm blessed to be on a journey of recovery, blessed to have this addiction that I am working on daily to recover from, so that maybe I get to do this now and then. Maybe I connect with one person or help one person. That would be good. So we are really short on time. I apologize. Were there any questions we could answer for you of any kind? Again, no boundaries. You can't hurt our feelings by asking a question.
I have a question. How do you remove the boundary that you were talking about?
And remind me of which boundaries are.
Like you said that your friends, there was a boundary.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so the question was, how do I remove the boundary so that the boundary that my friends perceived that I had the force field, if you will, that I put up, right? So that force field existed because I needed to protect myself from the pain of the reality, right? I wouldn't let them into that. It was honesty. It was, in other words, when I told the story, and think about, Smith Alley, who mentioned, he just started telling people, right? It's like, at some point, you're like, well, you got to gauge who you're going to tell because you want to make sure they can handle it. But once you're genuine, that's what kills the force field. That's what kills the boundaries. People sense that you are genuine and sincere, and the connection, that thing just fizzled away. They'll want to connect now because they know the genuine you. Does that help? Thank you. Yes, ma'am. The question was, how did I decide to become honest? I appreciate it. A wonderful question, as these all will be. In 2004, Jennifer found that stuff on the computer on a Friday night. On a Saturday, even though it kills me to admit it, Jennifer and I were going to go to BYU to watch a football game. They were playing Notre Dame that night. And I apologize to any BYU fans in here. I'm an Aggie. But we were going to go down because I like good football. And for some reason, after she found all that, she didn't want to go to the game with me anymore. I was confused. Couldn't understand why wouldn't she want to after just finding pornography on the home computer. But I went. I went anyway. It was a cold, brainy, stupid night. I was sitting on the east stands, surrounded by BYU people, bless their hearts. And I was just alone. Like, in BYU, it's wonderful. They sell out their stadium. There's thousands, 60, 70,000 people. And I was just there, alone. And she had been very clear with me about my choices. My choices were, one, I can pick her or our beautiful 4 children, or I could pick the rest of the world and my pornography and my addiction. And it was going to be one or the other. And I'll tell you, I fought that for months. 6 months at least it took me just being angry about her doing that to me. How dare she make an ultimatum like that? Couldn't she see I was, me victim-y, right? That was all my victim and all my addict talking, just raging, And she had just cut the power out from underneath me as an addict by taking care of herself and knowing she's going to be fine without me. And 6 months later is when I started making the connection to honesty. In that conversation, then it all came together for me. What she was saying, what she was doing, and what I needed to do moving forward. She always described to me that men are too good for 2 things, and parallel parking is not that important. And that leaves 1, right? Well, in our world, that's the priesthood, but it's also about being an honest, honorable human, a man of God, a man of a higher power. And so I chose honesty and a real life with her and my kids over not. So, did you have a question, sir?
I was just wondering how your love has grown.
The 2 of us? Let me have Jennifer start that, please.
It's a whole different life. We used to be enmeshed. We used to worry about what is he doing, what is she doing, I say we now fix our own mirrors. I used to get in Chris's car and drive, and I'd get back, and he'd say, "I can always tell when you drove. You've messed up my mirrors." Well, I can't put his mirrors back. How could I? He's taller than me. I can't possibly put his mirrors back. He can't possibly put my mirrors back. We just fix our own mirrors now. And we love each other, and we're on the same path, and we're carrying the same thing, and we're working together for the same goal. But we're not like depending on his actions for what I'm going to do, or my actions for what he's going to do. We both have the same goal, and we know what we need to do, and we're just moving forward. And that is so much better. The love is so much stronger, and just knowing that we both know is amazing.
And I think for me, it's real, and it's just genuine. And we're being asked to finish. Do you want to go one last question, and we'll?
So, anytime you are an addict or whatever it may be, if you're going to be starting a new diet, you start out and you are so strong, I'm going to do this, and it's going to be like this, and then you face that temptation. And what was how did you help yourself to be able to overcome that temptation, because we all face the temptation of whatever our resolve is?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, when faced with temptation now, when we're all gung-ho starting off recovery and we hit the first temptation, how do we deal with that? How do we not just, and then continue to do that, right? So, in the world of addiction, there's something called dailies. If you're familiar with dailies. Dailies are things you do every day that help you in recovery and to maintain sobriety and do those things. So what are the things, the daily activities that you take on to get yourself in a healthy place? In Lifestar, we talk about your physical well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, sexual well-being, and also self-care. And are we doing things in those 5 categories every day that keep us in a healthy spot? So in other words, when we hit the thing, right, when the temptation comes, we need to already be armed before that comes, so we're prepared for it. And then, of course, minimizing our exposure to it. If we're not prepared, it makes it much harder. Then you're in a very reactive mode of dealing with the temptation, which could be, am I going to hit my knees and pray for help? Am I going to extricate myself from the situation as fast as I can? There are those, but the caution I have, and the great quality question, it really comes down to how proactive are we in recovery? We have to do the work. I struggled so much for so long because I wasn't doing the work. I wasn't doing the group work. I wasn't doing my stuff. I was just hoping I'd be able to react in temptation. I usually failed. Daily, starting off, the first thing I do is I slide out of bed and hit my knees. I land on my knees. And before we go to bed, we kneel together and pray. During the day, then it's like, do I have a plan for my day? What are my meal plans? Because right now, if you couldn't tell, I have a little bit of an eating thing going on. It's probably not obvious. But so connecting then for me, connecting with scriptures. Like I go walking and I listen to podcasts every day and I do those types of things. So it's what are my healthy things? What are my healthy hobbies? Like I'm a woodworker. Am I spending enough time doing those types of things? Keeping that side of my brain engaged so I don't go limbic with my thinking. Keeping out of that animal mind. So those are just examples, but they're very personalized and personal to everybody that puts them together. The main point is do them. Set them up and do them. So I apologize for running long and keeping you here, but we'll be around. If you have other questions or want to grab us and have a sidebar, please feel free to do that. We'd happy to talk to anybody at whatever you want to talk to. And thank you for your patience.